Okay, so welcome. We had a little problem with Zoom. Dawn's not here to introduce, unfortunately, couldn't get on. So I'm here to introduce myself. So Simon Spohr, I work as a coach and yoga teacher and various other things I do with my life. And I was doing a webinar back in the start of August around grief, and this is a continuation of that. And we're going to be touching on the manner in which grief can become a teacher and a guide to us. Often we will push away grief and think that grief is a problem to be overcome or to be dealt with or to be removed from our life in some way, to be healed from. And my experience with grief is that it's something that is much better to be brought close, to be held and to be cherished, and to allow it to really be part of who you are and your story. And I mean, in that way, we achieve a sense of gravitas with our life and a sense of engagement with the truth of what it is to be human, because to be human is to suffer grief, and it's also to have great joy and great pleasure and bliss in life. The ability to move through this form and have the brain to appreciate the beauty of the world is phenomenal. And inherent in that is the ability to have this sense of loss and grief at the problems of the world and the suffering of the world. And so, what I want to touch on today is there's two stories. One's mine, some of my background and my story, and one is a sculptor in America. So we're going to jump in here, and just a couple of pictures to illustrate the story. When I was a child, we didn't go to church or temple or mosque or such things, and we went for family walks on a Sunday and bird watching and foraging and looking at wildflowers and butterflies and all the beauty that was around us in the English countryside, just outside London. And the hedgerows, the picture there on the left, the hedgerows were alive with bird song and constant interest of changing seasons of flowers and fruits and butterflies in the verges, and it was with great horror, I would say is not too strong a word, when I was around 7 years old in the mid-70s, that the fields started to be expanded and the hedgerows got ripped up, as in shown in the other picture. And I remember a very specific occasion one time, crossing a little stream. We used to have nets, and we'd paddle in this little stream, and we were going across this little bridge, and there was a massive, great big digger, JCB, ripping up the hedgerows that we were so familiar with, and I felt a huge amount of grief at that 7-year-old space, and seeing this what I was part of my playground, my joy, and was being destroyed in front of me, and so cut forward to some years hence, I found myself working as a ranger and working in the countryside, looking after nature reserves, working for the National Trust in Scotland, working for the Ministry of Environment in Denmark, working for the Nature Conservancy Council, as it then was in Scotland. I worked in Costa Rica in the rainforest, and a big reserve there, and part of my role was to enthuse and share my love of nature and educate, and part of it was to monitor and protect and look after, and that's and it was at some point in my early 20s that I started reflecting on, why have I chosen this as a career? What's the path here? Why did I go into this work? And it became very obvious that it was this first experience that had led me here, of seeing the countryside just being destroyed, And some part of me at that moment decided, I don't want this to happen, and I want to protect, I want to look after, and I want to share with other people how beautiful it all is, as it had been shared as it had been shared with me as a child. And so that got me sort of thinking more deeply. And I was in the rainforest, and in my mid-20s, I was working alone there most of the time, in one of the most diverse species of rainforest in the world, and it's obviously stunningly beautiful and full of the most incredible wildlife and plants and animals and birds and what have you. And in that space, I started to realize that that the wildlife doesn't actually need me. We do need to protect wildlife. There's no question of that in nature. But to enable for it to thrive itself, it doesn't need the presence of intelligent monkeys. It can do it on its own. Trees don't need us to grow. And I started to realize that actually the problem was man, was how disconnected we are, how our heads and our hearts are disconnected. And that sent me on a different journey, and I started. I left rangering, and I started working in the arts and putting on lots of different types of events. I did street theatre. I put on sculpture exhibitions. I put on dances and for adults and for teenagers, and I did performance poetry. A whole load of different things, all of them designed to help people to connect from the heads down to the hearts, and with the hope that maybe they might love a little bit more deeply then, and maybe they would love other people, and maybe they would love other species. And that's been my motivation throughout my life and the work that I do. It led me to explore therapy. It led me to explore dance as a healing form, and that's been a big part of my life, has been dancing on stage and doing healing work through dance and music and DJing, and I've done a lot of men's work, helping men, as I see that's where a lot of work's needed to be done. It happens to be that men get a bad rap, but it's we have the ability to disconnect, and that's very evolutionary wonderful ability, because it means we can go and kill animals, and we can defend people in the tribe, women and children and elderly, and we can cut off our emotions while we do that. But unfortunately, we can permanently cut off our emotions, and then we can become very destructive. And so I've been involved in a lot of men's work, and to try and heal that division of head and heart. And I also teach yoga, and with the same intention, and I do coaching work, again with the same intention. And so that's all stems from this early grief, and there's other grief I had before that 7-year-old state, but it's helped me to really value the grief that I have, to see what an amazing path that can take me on. If I really tap into it, and what is the core, where's my motivation coming from? And nearly always our motivation is well, not always maybe, but very often our motivation seems to me, the work that I do with individuals and with groups, it's coming from a place of grief. We may not name it that or recognize it as that, but that's sort of often a motivational start. So the other example I want to give is, and the reason I chose this mountain picture, by the way, was because this journey is like climbing a mountain. You know, we start in the valley, and we gradually gain more and more clarity in our lives as we move through them, and we hopefully, you know, gain some understanding of where we're at in our lives and how we got there. With the ability to look back down, and often the mountain is used in the spiritual context and in a therapeutic context of how we might climb to find our bliss, our enlightenment. But for me, one of the most important things is, yes, we can climb to our different mountain peaks in our life. But if we're not climbing back down to the valley and pointing our finger to those who haven't yet started climbing or are in a difficult place, then what value is that? So as coaches and therapists and just as human beings, it's wonderful to be able to share our journey and say there's a mountain there, and maybe it's worth you climbing it, and it's going to be a different journey for everybody. So I'm going to touch on Marco Cochran's work. This is a sculptor in California, and he displays his work at Burning Man Festival, which these pictures are taken. Festival that is very powerfully connected to grief. It's one of the most potent and amazing creative hubs in the world just now. Has been for some years, and with sculpture being one of the most important aspects of it, and lots of music and lots of healing and lots of ceremony and huge amounts of freedom to explore what it is to be oneself, and to experiment with what that might mean. It's a huge experimental playground, you could say, out in the deserts in Nevada. And Marco's story was as a child, around at a primary age. I'm not sure what age he was, but sort of 7, 8, 9, 10, that sort of age. He had a friend, young girl, playing with him at his home, and they finished their play, and she was his best friend. She went home, and on the way home, she was raped. And as a little boy who was not aware of sex yet, and had to have explained what had happened to his friend, it was obviously an incredibly traumatic experience for her, but also for him. And this is his story. He now, as an adult, is creating these stunning sculptures to show what women look like when they're not feeling predated, when they're not feeling threatened, when they're not feeling they have to perform, when they're not feeling that they are under threat from men. And his question along the bottom is, what would the world be like if women were safe? And that's on the sculpture in the middle there. That line is written on the around the edge of the podium in as many languages as Google Translate had at the time. The sculptures light up at night with lights inside, and you take from what you will on the photographs, but in seeing them in person, they are absolutely jaw-droppingly beautiful and absolutely stunning. And when the Bliss dance one on the left-hand side there, when I saw that at a distance in the desert, and everyone rides bicycles at Burning Man, I was cycling up towards it, and tears were coming down my eyes, from my eyes and down my cheeks, and I was seeing this woman, a woman who I have danced with on the dance floor, many women I've danced with, and who when they feel safe, dance with a sense of freedom that is very rarely seen in any other context, and men also do not generally dance with a sense of freedom either. And the way that he captured this essence of somebody who is dancing without feeling unsafe, he captured it exquisitely, and it's really touched many people at this festival. The festival attracts something like 70,000 people or more, and when any group of people come together in that sort of context, there's going to be problems with aggression and abuse and what have you. Over the years, these sculptures have been erected, and the message put out around what it's about. The cases of reported abuse, and it's only reported abuse of women at that festival, went from 70 down to 7, and then now down to 0. And it's had a massive impact on the culture of the people who go to Burning Man. And this is a festival that attracts people from all over the world. And he's got a big Marco's got a big project on to change this culture that we have, and these sculptures are now permanently exhibited in different parts of America. Bliss, I think, is in Las Vegas. I think, oh no, in San Francisco. I think Truth and Beauty is in Las Vegas. So so that's Marco's journey, and I highly recommend you have a look at his website and see what else he does and how he creates these amazing sculptures. It's so incredibly large, but so perfect. The re-evolution actually breathes, the form breathes. So that's Marco's story. So I invite you to just have a moment to yourself, to just tune in and just take a breath and close your eyes if that's comfortable for you, and just have a moment inside, feeling into your body, into your story. Just relaxing and contemplating your personal journey and the grief that has happened, the losses that have occurred, the situations where you were not comfortable, where you wanted things to be different for your own benefit or for others' benefit, and how that might have informed the choices you've made in your life. Can you see any threads, any weavings of your tapestry that are coloured with that sense of loss, with that texture of wanting things to change? And just have a little moment to explore that. And gently come back into here and now. So the idea of this webinar was to have it interactive. I know there's a number of people signed up to be here, and no doubt that those who haven't made it will come in and watch at another occasion. And so there's only one or two on to ask questions, but I'm going to open that up to a Q&A now and see if anybody's wanting to have a chat and see if there's any guidance I can provide or any inspiration we can share in. So if anyone's wanting to chat, then please come on, and I'll see if I can just change the screen around. Can I do that?
Well, I should say hello, Simon.
Oh, hi there. Hi, Don, you're here.
I had a very good opportunity to deepen my practice of patience when I was trying to log on to Zoom and turn a negative into a positive. You know, I was reading a Buddhist magazine yesterday, and it said we have so many opportunities to deepen our practice of waiting. And waiting has such a negative connotation, like I'm waiting for somebody in a queue to speed up, I'm waiting at the traffic lights. But actually, these are perfect little moments throughout the day that deepen our practice and give us that mindfulness and an opportunity to relax and just be rather than stressing out. So that's what I chose to do when I was panicking, thinking,
Beautiful.
Oh my God, how do I get onto Zoom and help Simon and introduce him? And you've managed all by yourself. So well done. And maybe with Ria's help, I did ask Ria if she could step in. So it's lovely to see you again. And I know, you know, talking about mindfulness, you've been on your own retreat recently. So I'm sure I'll get to hear more about that later. But yes, feel free to post your questions in the chat box, or if you're not shy, actually ask them of Simon while he's in person, because as I'm sure Simon said in the introduction, we created this part 2 because he hadn't quite had enough time to complete his presentation in session 1, and because you said you had questions to ask. Now, obviously, the same people, I can see from the numbers, you had a couple of dozen on the first one, they're not here today. So, maybe they're going to have to send their questions in writing. But those of you who are here today, feel free to ask a question.
Yeah, and I welcome anybody who wants to, because I think this issue is very important to explore. It's really just curiosity, and that takes us into realms of healing. And so if anybody wants to have an email with me, or they want to arrange a Skype call or something like that, I'm very welcome to host that space. I don't want to feel that people are feel that they may have had things uncovered for themselves and feel a little bit lost, maybe. So if anybody's needing that support, then I'd be glad to offer it.
Thank you. Rebecca?
Yeah, hi Dawn. So I'm on my own grief journey at the moment, and I think it's a fine line between what we kind of, I suppose, are taught to share with clients and what we're not. And I guess it's just any advice, I guess, on how that can be helpful, how you can use your own experience of grief and share it in a helpful way with clients, just to, I suppose, demonstrate that empathy, that understanding of what they might be going through and how you've kind of used it. But I'm always very conscious that, coaching session is about them, it's not about you. But I thought that what was really interesting was the image of coming back down to the valley and pointing up there, and how that was a useful viewpoint or standpoint to kind of almost share with others. So yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Simon, or any personal experience in within your coaching practice.
So I think there's a sort of wisdom that yes, it is definitely about the client, and that has to be primary. And I do find that when some coaching I've had, when the coach goes off on their own story, which may or may not be relevant, sometimes one can feel a little bit abandoned. Well, I'm actually paying for my story and to be looked at, and what's happening with this. So for one thing, if I was going to share my story, I would always seek permission. Would you like to hear my story on this? My experience on this. That would be a primary thing. And I would be wary on the depth I shared and really check in with the person. Are they okay with hearing this, or if I shared about this or whatever, while I'm sharing. And then also, was that helpful? Yeah, check to get the feedback. And in my experience, it normally is. And in terms of what you share, I really feel into my body for that answer, that because that's where the wisdom's held. It's not up here. It's not like, oh, if I do, it's not like being in a conversation, with a friend where they tell a story and then you tell a story and then they tell a story and you tell a story, and it's all sort of links and it goes off in different tangents. It's avoiding that space and dropping into my body and going, okay, so as they're telling their story or they're expressing their difficulty around the issue, what do I feel here? It's like, is this appropriate to share? And so I really follow my intuition strongly. So I might say to them, I have an intuition to share something about my story. I'm feeling that in my chest right now, and I wonder, would you think that would be helpful for you? Yeah. And then being careful on how much time one spends on that story, so honing it down to something that's really specific, and again tuning your intuition for that guidance, sort of like, what is it? Because we've all got vast complicated stories. What's the essence that needs to be picked out for that particular client at that particular moment? So I'm just going to think of an example. Helping a client with an abuse situation, so I want to know that I see. I want them to know that I really see them, yeah. And so I might share something very simple, just like I really know what you're going through. I don't have to tell the story there, yeah. but just to interject and say, I really feel you. You know, I've had an experience that's not the same as yours, but there's a commonality to my experience. Yeah, no detail. Yeah, or it might be, you know, I really do understand this because I had a very similar experience. Would you like to hear that and how I've healed from that? Yeah. Oh yes, that would be wonderful. But it's not so much the detail of the healing journey, because everyone's healing journey is completely unique. It's the getting across the message that healing is possible, that there's stages and steps that I went through, which may not be the stages and steps they go through, but at least there is a path, you know, and that journey from an abuse situation, which is very difficult, to an integration and an owning of the story and a holding of the story, which then becomes something they can be proud of, that they have integrated that. They haven't pushed it away from them. They don't feel shame anymore. They don't feel disgust anymore of themselves or the situation or whatever it may be, and blame, and they don't feel anger and they don't feel rage. They've got to go through all of that, maybe, and maybe they've gone through that, maybe they're in that, whatever the case may be, and maybe they're unconscious of that, but it's driving the dysfunctional behavior in their business or whatever it may be. But once they can really bring that in and hold that and look at that and own that as part of who they are, then it suddenly becomes something, oh wow, that's why I've chosen not to abuse my own children. That's why I've chosen to work in this industry that is helping people. That's why I've chosen to do this. That's why I chose to hide myself and choose alcohol as a thing, because that was, you know, that was protecting me and that was valuable. But now I own it and now I hold it and now I have the safety to look at it. I don't need to do that, or, you know, to do that dysfunctional behavior, or it gives me more clarity in why I'm doing this work, this good work in the world in response to that situation. You know, that's certainly my story with in conservation, was it gave me a massive context for like why I was doing it, and then took me off on a completely different tangent, because I was like, actually, I don't need to be saving the actual trees. It's actually the people that were the problem. It was the farmer pulling down the hedgerows that was actually who I needed to reach to at that moment. But and maybe as a 7-year-old, if I'd run up to him and said, like, you're cutting down all my wonderful playground, you know, maybe he would have thought differently. You know, who knows? So it's, does that help? Is that
Yeah, it does for sure. And I think that focus on intuition, and obviously, yeah, asking for permission. I think that's yeah, some great tips. Thank you.
Yeah, the intuition is, it's something that comes with practice and deep listening and meditation, and, you know, practice skills like that, and it can be a wonderful modeling for the client as well, because you're inviting them to be more in tune with themselves and have that more holistic approach. You know, it's and so we're in a culture that's so heady, that's so focused on what's going on up here, and in primal cultures, not primitive, I always like to use the word primal, first cultures, that wasn't the case. People would sit in council in a group of elders or the village would sit, and they would sit in silence, and they would feel deeply what they were come to talk about. And one might then choose to be inspired by their body to stand up and speak, and then they would go back to silence. The Native Americans, the stories, Native American culture that says how they couldn't understand why white men just never stopped talking, and we tended to portray them as being very stoic. No, they were just in their bodies and feeling, and only speaking when it was appropriate to speak. So, and so modeling that to a client can be good, because then it's taking them into their bodies. And often I'll say to a client, sort of as something difficult is coming up for them, they're finding, you know, emotions coming up for them as they're sharing, or they're finding they're stuck in their heads. I don't know what to think about this. I'm really confused. And then the question I'll always say is like, what's happening in your body right now? Yeah. And bang, So, you know, it's not always easy for people to get there, especially men. We tend to be very cut off at the throat chakra, and we're disconnected from our bodies. So often, if you ask a man, and it's not just a, you know, it's not so simple as that, men and women, but it tends to be the stereotype. If you ask a man how he feels, he'll say something along the lines of, what do you mean? I don't mean anything. I'm just asking how you feel. And, well, I think, no, not how you think. Just how do you feel in your body right now? Well, I'm feeling a bit angry because you asked me all these questions. So, and then eventually, you know, you can get down to there, and then sort of like, oh, how I'm feeling? Well, what's that confusion you just talked about, or that emotion that was just coming up? Where is it in your body? Where do you feel it? You know, and then, well, I feel it in my chest. I feel it in my hands. I feel it in my thighs. I feel it, you know, wherever they feel it. I feel it in my head swirling about. And then there's a doorway in to really finding what the problem is, you know. And so, and I like to use imagery of what's actually, what that, you know, what are you feeling? What's the color of it? What's the texture? What's the shape? What's the, you know, and there's an amazing wisdom can come out of that. So suddenly the feeling is of constriction. What does that constriction look like? Oh, it's like ropes around me, or, you know, okay, so what does that represent? Oh, well, when I was a kid, this whole story comes out. You know, I felt really restricted. I wasn't able to play and do what I wanted to do. I had to do all these chores in the house or whatever, and I felt really restricted. I felt tied down. Right. So how's that working out in your work then? You know, because you're coming to the coaching for your work. You know, oh yeah, I feel really constricted by my boss. Yeah, that's the confusion. I couldn't understand. But yeah, and then suddenly there's this clarity comes through. You know, and so the body wisdom for me is a really core, and but to hold somebody with that space, you've got to go there yourself. You've got to be in touch with that yourself, and explore that yourself in your own time and with your own coach or therapist.
A great question, Rebecca. Yeah, very good. I mean, a couple of things that I would add to what Simon has said is, obviously, if we think about the VHF, the visual, kinesthetic, auditory, you know, you've got to make sure that you're speaking the same language as the client. So for a lot of people, while you're so you know firstly ascertain their VHF, but you can build up to that because we're all of those things, but we tend to have a dominant one. So of course people can feel it's like when you say to somebody, you know, close your eyes and visualize that such and such. A lot of people say they're not visual, but if you ask them to close their eyes and describe their drive and the front door and the hallway, they can do it perfectly. And they, oh, right, you are visual. It's just exactly. Practice.
And that's exactly what I mean. That's exactly what I mean about taking us, you know, it might not be a direct path. You might, that's a perfect example of that sort of taking a bleak angle to it. And the same is true of just, you know, to go back to the topic of grief. You know, the same is true of grief. It's people have very conflicting ideas around what grief is within their own head, and within individuals there's a lot of you know, different experiences of what that word means, and so I'm using the word grief to capture a lot of different things here, you know, and as I illustrated in the other talk. And so any loss, any change, any situation which we don't like, any boundary crossing that happens to us, you know, all of these things can be summed under grief, and so when we sort of look at it in that way, then you can sort of see that it's just a part of life. It's a very integral part of life. There is no life without loss. You know, we're all going to die, and we're all going to suffer losses during our life, and we're all going to have our boundaries crossed. We're all going to have to learn how to establish boundaries. We're going to change our boundaries. We're going to, you know, one person going to have one boundary, another person going to have another, and throughout life, we're going to change our boundaries and have different realities as a result of that. So all of that is interwoven with this concept of grief. But in our culture, we tend to think of grief, in my experience of the culture, the European culture that I'm part of, we tend to have a concept of hiding from grief, you know, and packaging it into a sort of thing. Well, you should have got over it by now, or didn't you do that already? Or, well, the funeral's happened, now you need to get on with your life. Or, you know, it's like, well, yeah, you've lost something, but like, you know, it's sort of like, doesn't matter, just replace it with something new. And it's sort of like, well, that's not the same as the thing that I've had for 20 years that's now broken, and, you know, whatever it may be. So it's there's a lot of language that sort of we're encouraged to hide our grief. And I was saying to Rebecca at the start of this call, by the time I was 14, I'd been to about the same number of funerals, and a number of them were school people I'd known at school, and so grief for me wasn't something strange, and it was something that was just part of what life was. But I've known people that I've worked with who the first funeral they ever went to was when they were in their 50s or 60s, and it was their parents, and so they had no experience of how to navigate that world of a funeral, let alone the actual concept of grief, because they hadn't gone through that pathway in a conscious way or actively at all with other people in their life before that happened. They hadn't been held as children when their pet died, you know. So it's, you know, everyone's coming at grief from such different angles and different perspectives, but it's all an integral part of life, and everybody's feeling it, you know.
I have to say, in my experience, I've never felt the need or been asked to talk about my grief. I lost my brother last year, and in all the coaching that I've done since he died, which was very traumatic because it was out of the blue, it's never come up in my coaching, Rebecca, other than to say what Simon was saying about that commonality. You know, once you've lost somebody, it's very hard to find a situation where somebody hasn't had that experience themselves. So there is that. So I've never been able to say, well, how useful would it be for me to share? So what I would perhaps be saying things is like, you know, how useful would it be to talk to you about the 9 stages of grief that will help you understand what you're going through, without me saying, because that's what I'm going through or have been through. But I also take a lot of my clients out walking, particularly if they are in some sort of trauma or grief or upset, because I feel that walking in nature is so much easier to release, and it's nurturing rather than sat in the traditional office type of environment with a box of tissues between you. You know, if you're out walking, whether you're going up the hill and pointing up, you know, the valleys, as we live in the valleys here, I just find it's such a fantastic way of getting the client to release what they need to release, whether it's anger, grief, whatever. And so my self-disclosure, I suppose, comes around the fact that, you know, you are not alone. I've been through this. As the Buddha said to the woman who lost her son, you know, the mustard seed story, I'll help you if you can come back and find somebody who hasn't been through this. And of course, she searches from village to village and then realizes she's not alone, because everybody has lost somebody. Everybody has to go through this. So even just little anecdotes like that help people realize that there is this commonality, that there is this shared experience.
I think that's really pertinent, and I think the nature connection, that's wonderful that you're taking people out in that way, and I don't do that because a lot of my work's online. But what I do is I will invite the client to take themselves to nature, in response. So to, depending on what's come up for them, but specifically if it's a deep issue that they're needing to look at from childhood, or it's a grief issue that's happened in adulthood, or what have you, is to encourage them. Is there a safe space you would like to go to and explore this further? And nearly always they will say somewhere outside. That's I want to go to the beach, I want to go to the mountain, I want to go to the forest, I want to and so then I'll then get a conversation. Well, what would that look like if you're going to do that in a conscious way? It's not just going for a walk. This is something else. What would that look like for you? And it depends on who they are and what they are. Well, they might bring in their meditation practice. They might bring in some ritual practice. They might bring in some yoga. They might bring in some other thing, or they may have no idea on that type of world, and that's fine too. It's sort of like so, but really letting them lead that with some held guidance, and sort of suggestions on how that might look, and that's proved to be very helpful for the client, because it gives them permission to go into nature in that conscious way. And what happens in nature when you're walking side by side with somebody, which is wonderful to do as well, is there's a lot of different things that go on in that space. You're not looking eye to eye all the time. For men, that's specifically for men, eye to eye contact is very confrontational. And so women tend to, as a stereotype, do eye to eye contact better. But many men, I don't have a problem with it, but many men do have a big issue around eye to eye contact. Teenagers have a real issue with eye to eye contact. Fathers who are separated from the family and take their kids out to the restaurant or whatever, take them out, they often have problems relating to them. And so I will say specifically to their sons, and I've given advice many times to lots of men, said, what do you do? Well, we go out for a meal, we go to McDonald's or whatever they do. Do you sit opposite your child? Yeah. Well, don't. Sit side by side and look out into the world, and then have a conversation. It's transformed their relationships. And so that walking with your client, works on that level. You're not looking at each other. It's not confrontational. You've got space between, as you climb the stile, or you look at the bird flying by. There's space. There's physical space around you, so you're not in your head. You're out in the world, looking out into the world, and there's a view maybe, and there's all sorts of metaphors that come in. You might be talking about something and something sad, and then you see a dead animal, or you see a dead bird, or you see a tree that's fallen down, and suddenly that becomes the metaphor right there in front of you. Nature becomes this integrated process, and that's the shamanic sort of side of it, is that the more deeply you go into this, the more that the plants and animals will appear at exactly the right moment when you're going through what you need to go through individually or with somebody. And I always find that quite astounding. And that can even happen inside. So in the men's work I do, we meet outside, or we meet inside, and that might be in a group, it might be with an individual. But even inside, we've had many occasions in group work where someone's going through something, and the bull outside in the farm outside where I live will kick off making a noise, or an owl will call, or a crow will be in the garden cawing, and it's never normally there. And it's incredible how that interaction can happen, and how meaningful that can be to somebody, and it makes the experience that they're going through, it gives them it gives an incredible sense of validation to it. So yeah, getting out in nature is or connecting to nature. The other point I wanted to just pick up on there, Dawn, was about the sort of sharing side of things. And if it has to be true for you, that's the key. It's like, it's no point in sharing if it's not true for you. It's like, even a story, that a quote from a story, the Buddha's story or whatever it may be, it's got to really resonate. I find it quite frustrating when people come out with these sort of things, with a sort of, a triteness to it, it's sort of like it's something they've read and they think it's smart, but it's sort of like, if it isn't actually, integral to who you